you know, so I'm going to introduce myself. Thanks, Rose. I'm going to introduce myself, and we're going to keep on pushing forward. I will have time for Q&A in the end. And Rose, Madia, I hope that the Q&A part won't be recorded, if that's okay. Okay, just because I feel like sometimes people might have personal questions and specific questions. So let me introduce myself. First of all, I just have to let y'all know I am so happy to be in this space. You really have no idea. Like, I see so many familiar faces. Hey, Laura, I've seen people that have been my mentees. I've seen people who've been my colleagues that I've seen at NERA and other conferences. And so it's super great to see and have you all a part of this space. My name is Jade Keynes Lee. Some people call me Jade, some people call me Dr. Lee, some people call me Prof. Lee. I don't really care as long as you call me in my right name. Don't call me out my name. And I am excited to share that I have two affiliations. I'm an assistant research professor at the University of Kansas. I work remotely. So as you saw, I am currently living in Southeast Virginia, about 45 minutes north of Virginia Beach. And I also am founder and president of an educational consulting firm called JCRG USA Incorporated. And I started that company back in 2013, was doing it part-time for about 8 years, and then decided to launch it full-time several years ago. So I'm excited to share and talk more about that in another setting. But really what I want to talk about right now is my passion for education, specifically teaching and learning. So I was a K-12 teacher for almost 10 years. I taught in a few different metropolitan areas in the country. I taught at the graduate student level for about 8 years. And currently in the last several years, I don't teach in the classroom, but I think I do a lot of mentorship, professional development series such as this, where I'm still able to tap into my love and passion for all things teaching. I got my master's in teaching English. And then when I got my doctoral degree, it has nothing to do with English since it is in measurement and assessment. But I still have that passion for the English language as well as for teaching the English language. And so hoping that I can share some things with you today that might give you, some new ways to think about your instruction. So I'm going to share my screen. And if you have questions, I do a really good job of monitoring, move this out the way. I do a good job of monitoring the chat while I'm presenting. So feel free to use the chat. I found out that the chat will not be recorded. So if you wanted to just go ahead and, jot down, can y'all see me and hear me? You went away. Oh, please tell me my computer's not frozen.
Yes, we can see and hear you, and I see your presentation.
That's fascinating because my screen is black. So let's try that again. Present review, no, play from start. Let's try again. Okay, it might be the case that I am going to have to just share it from this screen because I don't know why my screen is turning black. Hold on one second. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and share it from here. Hopefully that'll be okay for y'all. Let me minimize this a little bit. So yeah, I taught in person for my whole K-12 career. But then about half of my graduate teaching experience was virtual and online and remote, and the other half was in person. So I have a lot of things to share about teaching, and I will sometimes contextualize it for what's in person versus what's virtual. So already, hopefully you learned one tip and trick if you didn't already know it. The strategy called Chatterfall is a really good way in which to engage learners virtually, especially if you are teaching a course that's at the higher education level, and it is the expectation that the students are engaged. This is a professional development series. You're not being paid to be here and you're not paying necessarily for this experience. So it shouldn't be an expectation of mine that you all shouldn't be multitasking or couldn't be multitasking. But if you're teaching a course at the higher ed level and it's remote, yeah, you do have a fair expectation that your students should be fully engaged. And so that's one way to increase engagement, that whatever they're doing, they have to stop and use the chat. I use the chat very frequently if I'm teaching synchronously. I've taught remote asynchronously a lot as well, and we can talk about additional engagement strategies throughout the presentation. So I know some people on this call might be graduate students that have never taught courses before. Some people on this call might be graduate students that have been TAs and or instructors of record and be the lead instructor. I know there might be some faculty members here who have taught for a long time and are like, hey, I can always learn something new. And there might be some people here who have thought about whether or not they want to be a faculty member that does have teaching responsibilities, but not quite sure if that's the path for them. So I can also talk about that because I've been a tenure track faculty member where I did teach courses, but then also the last couple of years that I've been at University of Kansas, I'm a research professor, so I don't teach courses. So you can still be faculty and not teach courses, and knowing how much you like teaching or not, that would help determine what type of faculty member you would want to be if you're in a stage where you're trying to figure that out. So this is what disengagement looks like. And I know what disengagement looks like very well on the remote level. Like if I'm asking for a chatter fall or I'm saying, hey, thumbs up, everybody, and I don't see thumbs up from some people, doesn't matter if everybody has their camera off. I know how to measure engagement virtually, but man, oh man, when you're in front of your students and they're like on their phones or this is what they look like, how demoralizing, right? That is the worst for any instructor because even if you didn't expect them to absolutely love whatever you're talking about, you want them to want to know. And I know that there are lots of us who have struggled with the disengagement of students, especially post-COVID. It's been like, it was like next level post-COVID. And I remember I taught only graduate students. So I can only imagine how much different it was for people who were teaching undergraduate students. So I want us to stop and think a little bit, and I want us to use the chatter, use the chat box one more time, because I'd like you to think about some instructors that you've had at the collegiate level, whether undergrad or grad, who were just super duper dope. I'm wearing my sweatshirt today, Dope Black Educator, and I know that I have had some awesome instructors in my lifetime as being a student, and I still feel like I'm a student. I'm always learning new things, and I feel like I have some good instructors now. But I'm talking about formal collegiate level instruction. And I'd like you to just jot down, not their names, I don't even really care what they taught, but what were some characteristics? It says subpar, but I want you to think of the amazing ones. I don't want to run out of time for all the slides. So I'm going to skip the subpar and I want you to focus on the amazing ones, okay? Just about 20 seconds. Okay, the question is, can you write down in the chat one or two characteristics of some amazing instructors that you've had either at the undergraduate level or the graduate level? And you can just press enter whenever you're finished. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Supportive, that's a big one. All right, thank you for sharing, y'all. Yeah, I definitely feel like I've had some amazing instructors, but I've also had some subpar ones, right? All right, so I'm going to skip the discussion since we discussed earlier some other things, and I want to make sure we don't run out of time. Okay, so let's start a little bit about developing a course. So one of the things that is important to note is that not everybody is going to be in a situation where they're developing a course from scratch. Even if you are slated to teach a course or if you've taught courses in the past, sometimes the departments or the universities or colleges that you're within, they'll give you a syllabi that the last person taught from. And depending upon how much time you have, how much energy you have, how much familiarity with the content of that course you have, you may just pick that syllabus up and teach it as is. Especially if you got hired like 2 weeks before the semester starts, right? You don't even have time to get the books to read to figure out what book you want to use. So not everyone is in a luxurious position, and I say luxurious in quotation marks, to develop their own course. But man, oh man, if you had time, energy, and familiarity as well as passion for the content of the course that you're slated to teach, it's just super dope if you have that chance to develop a course. And you always want to begin with the end in mind. So there's a few different ends. Okay. And I want to be clear about this because everyone's situation is different. But when I say begin with the end in mind, I mean it at a few different levels. Number one, do these teaching evaluations matter for you? That is an important consideration. At the end of the course, when students give teaching evaluations, will it matter for you? Not in your spirit and soul, like I care what my students think in terms of the feedback that they give me. Hopefully that's the case for everyone on this call. I mean, however that might impact your next steps professionally. Because if you know that you are at a research university and teaching isn't a main part of your tenure process and what you're going to be focusing on when you go up for tenure, doesn't mean you don't do your best, but it does mean that before you develop that course, you think about that. Because some of us who love teaching, I'm one of them, will put our heart, soul, and everything we have into that one course at the detriment of the other aspects of our professional success and well-being. I know many of people who didn't get tenure, but their teaching evaluations were amazing. And if they are at a research university and didn't bring in external funding and didn't have the right types of collaboration, they didn't get tenure, even though they had great courses, students loved them. So you have to know what your end is in terms of if you're at a teaching focused institution and you don't have research responsibilities, or that's just not as important for the people who are deciding whether or not you're going to stay or go. That's one end you have to think about. You also have to think about the end in terms of how many points during the semester to get to the end are you going to assess comprehension, understanding, and the knowledge and skills and abilities that the students are learning? Because how many people I know that I've had as instructors who had like one test at the end. This is not law school. That is common and typical in law school, and I think it's terrible practice pedagogically, but that's what's common in law school. You have one assessment at the end of the course, and that's what your grade is based on. And if you're not in that profession and you're teaching at the higher ed level, not in that discipline, and you're teaching at the higher ed level, you should not be doing that. So you should be thinking about how many hit points in the semester are you going to assess whether or not students are picking up what you're putting down. Okay, there's a few other ends, but I'm going to keep on going. Just know that there's levels to this when I say begin with the end in mind. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So here's one example. I have a lot of snapshots of different syllabi, and this PowerPoint will be available, so y'all don't have to take crazy notes. I share, I don't gatekeep. So a lot of this is from syllabi that I've actually developed throughout the years of teaching. And I will say that the last syllabus that I developed, my last course that I taught, traditional course, was 25 pages long. That is not how my syllabus started off, but that is how it ended, because each year I learned more and I continued to add, refine, develop, because the syllabus is a contract. It is a contract between you and the students. And the more information you put around your expectations, the more you're going to save yourself. And this is super important for people who are teaching in predominantly white institutions, and they are a person of difference in any kind of way. I'm not going to share specifics, but just know that in my 9 years of teaching higher education, I have had so many accusations from students about discrimination, meaning I discriminated against them, so much so that I was deposed at the Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education. It went all the way to the top. It was a 2-year plus process, but because my syllabus was as clear as it could be, I kept all the documentation, I was exonerated. But if I didn't cover my butt as a person of color at a predominantly white institution in a predominantly white state, I would have been screwed. So you want to think about the things I'm showing you and not say, wow, that's a lot, that's too much. No, because too much, when you know more, you can do better and you can cover yourself. So what I'm aiming to do is not just for the students to know, it's also for me to know, to keep me on track with what I have to do. So this is really kind of like K-12 esque with the what will students be able to know and do, but I use it because good pedagogy is good pedagogy. And also many of my students were K-12 teachers or wanted to be or used to be. And so they resonated with the language and the clarity. So Bloom's taxonomy is something that I don't know how many people know about, but I really want you all to take some time to investigate. This wheel is really the best one snapshot I would share with anyone who was curious about Bloom's. Basically, what level of learning do you want the students to get from you about different content area? Ramona, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. So like you're teaching lots of different things. Let's say you're teaching intro to stats, right? Intro to stats. And you have lots of different things to cover. Maybe your syllabi goes all the way from, like all the way to like two-way ANOVA or something. And some things that you're teaching, you only want students to just be able to state it. You just want them to identify it. You don't need them to do anything deeper than that. Knowledge is sort of the baseline of learning. You see that in the purple wheel, but then you can go all the way up to evaluation where you are assessing, you're having students assess things, you're having them justify things, you're having them give recommendations. That's a higher level of learning. It takes more cognitive demand. So you need to think about the level, not just what you want to teach and what you want them to learn, but what levels you want them to learn it at. Another way that people like to think about these different levels of learning is called Webb's Depth of Knowledge. I also recommend you go check that out because it is really a good way for you to figure out what is the depth of the knowledge that I want them to gain about this thing that I'm teaching them. Okay. I learned every K-12 teacher that I know knows all about this, but however, most people who are teaching at the higher ed level, especially if they got a PhD, at a traditional institution, never really had to take a class on teaching, never had to take a course on teaching. I got my master's in teaching. And so I'm like, well, no wonder at the higher ed level, some instructors or some students are struggling with instructors because they're like, wait, I came from a K-12 environment where these were things that were required of K-12 teachers to know and be able to do and pedagogically share with their students. But the higher ed level, the standards are not necessarily the same, but good practice is good practice. So I want you to think about whatever course you're focusing on in your mind right now, of what course you have taught, what course you will teach, what course you currently are teaching, or what course you really would like to teach one day, and think about the standards of the field, of the discipline. So gratefully, NCME, our professional association, came out with the Foundations of Competency 2 years ago, and that has been a game changer for giving folks who are in measurement programs, instructors, some guidance on what should be the standards of things we should convey in our measurement related courses. I was, in this particular example, I was teaching a internship supervisor course. And so the standards were not just my own standards, but they were also guided by the department, and the department standards were guided by the teacher certification exam that they had to take when they exited the program. So there could be standards of practice beyond your own, and you should consider those, okay? I'll skip that. Know how you will be evaluated. And I sort of touched on this a little bit because on purpose in the title, it says faculty, but there's a lot of different types of faculty members, right? There are some amazing clinical faculty who do a lot of teaching in certain departments and don't get their credit and don't get their due. But those clinical faculty positions are often like one-year contracts with renewable options, right? You can be at a Research One institution or a small liberal arts college, and the evaluation standards for you as an instructor will differ depending upon the space that you're in. And then I put down here students' popular and unpopular opinions. Unfortunately, I'll tie that with course evaluations. Unfortunately, people who teach courses that require students to think deeply around long-standing beliefs in any kind of way. And it could be a science course, right? Like if they don't, certain ways of thinking about science, it doesn't have to just be a philosophy course or a religion course. And you would be surprised if you're thinking about intro to stats, like how might that, there's possibilities Hey, Ramona, I need you to keep yourself muted, okay? Thank you. So yeah, I think you should be thinking about like diversity, multicultural education courses, those kinds of courses that challenge like gender studies courses. Those courses oftentimes have some really unpopular opinions of students at the end because they're challenging things that maybe their parents and their families taught them, and that can be really disruptive. So you have to know how you'll be evaluated when you touch upon those types of topics. Doesn't mean you don't still stand strong on your pedagogical and content related beliefs, but you should know to help guide you in the decisions that you make. All right, so developing your syllabus is step 2. This is some basic information, and I want to share a little bit about I put this at the top of all my syllabi. This was when I was at University of New Hampshire. So you see my email for UNH. I don't put personal email. It is really, 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 really important not to cross professional boundaries when it comes to how you want students to contact you. Just a couple of days ago, there was a woman who was teaching at a historically Black college and university. She had them use some social media app. I don't remember which one, but some social media app where she basically was like the first day of the class, and she was introducing herself and talking. She thought that it was private. I don't know how, but she thought it was private, and it went out to everyone. And it was an African American studies course too, and she was vilified. And it wasn't even like she did anything that terrible, in my personal opinion, but it was the fact that she was having them use social media and it was open to all these people that were not in her course. Don't do that. Don't give them your personal email. And I wouldn't give my personal cell phone ever. What I would do is develop some type of like Google phone number where, you know, it's a number that it's like, if I don't have my office number forwarded to my phone because I want to turn off when I leave my office, maybe that's something you all choose to do too. Sometimes people have developed like Google phone numbers. They're free to develop, and then people have to announce themselves when they call. So there's some barriers still. So there's lots of different ways. I also had office hours available by appointment in person. Remember, this is a graduate student, so it's not going to be the same at undergrad level. But I also gave people the opportunity to have Zoom office hours or phone office hours. That was really helpful for many of my students were working adults that had families, and so that flexibility was critical. But nowadays, especially since post-COVID, you don't know what people's circumstances are. They could have no family and be like 22, but have like a mental health challenge that they're battling, right? And so giving them multiple opportunities to reach you and have office hours is critical. And then I also had like drop-in office hours where it was via like the learning management system, which I'll get into later, during certain hours of the day, especially for my remote virtual courses. This was super important. So every day, Monday through Friday, I would be just available in, I guess you could think about it like DMs or something, the same time each day. And some people might drop in, some people might not. But then at the end of the semester, no one could say that I was not available for them. Look at all these ways. And I was consistent and religious. And the office hours in person, luckily we didn't have to have in-person office hours at this institution, but I have worked at other institutions where you have to have 10 hours of like in-person office hours. And God forbid something comes up where you get sick and you can't make it. You got to also, I think, on top of that, have some alternative where it's like, you know, I can still meet with you by phone if you can't make it. Because if a student needs help and they can't, maybe there's traffic, maybe it's bad weather, you don't know. Maybe they're trying not to be, maybe they feel like they're coming down with something and they're trying not to be in your space because they're trying to protect other people from whatever cold they might be catching. So giving students multiple opportunities to touch base with you is super critical. This is a course overview. I'm going to pass out these slides. So I'm going to kind of skip some of the stuff that you can see on your own because I do want to leave some time for questions. Required books. So I don't know. I guess some people still have bookstores on campus and they use those bookstores, but a lot of times I'm finding that the instructors are not learning about what courses they're going to be teaching until right before the semester. For like, that's like just common. Even if you're not an adjunct, you could be faculty and someone was scheduled to teach that course and something terrible happened with their health and now the course is yours. So how to give students required books and materials, to some degree you have to be a little bit flexible. I know that in almost always I make the first like week of readings like when I was teaching in person, I'd photocopy it just so that everyone would have access. There's some version of like universal design principles, that, you know, accessibility is really something that I'm really keen on. I mean, not surprisingly, since I care about equity, and I care about equity for all. And there are some students who, like, for a variety of reasons, like maybe it's money, they can't buy the books right away, or they're waiting on their loan check to come through. So I kind of just would always make that first week of readings available, or be a little bit lighter on the readings. Maybe it's more like video stuff if possible. But sometimes you have a campus bookstore and you can just order the books and have them deliver it. But because I was teaching graduate students who were like never on campus, I would give them the opportunity to get the books sent to them directly. And this recommended resource, I have like required resources, but then recommended resources, because writing is a big thing that lots of instructors struggle with. And some courses I taught were labeled as writing intensive courses, but not most of them. So I am not about to be sitting with talking to people about comma splices. Like, go to the Writing Center on campus. And if you're not on campus, here's an online writing resource that can also help you with citations if they need like APA citation help. Let me see if anyone's put anything in the chat, because I said I was going to monitor it, but I haven't been. Oh, no problem, Lamona. I figured it was, I didn't think he was doing it on purpose. Okay. Ooh. All right, learning objectives, that's kind of similar to the standards that we talked about a little bit. This was for a course, an education research course that I was teaching. Course activities. Now, this is for an online course. So again, I kind of going back and forth for people who are teaching remote versus in person. And even in remote, it could be synchronous or asynchronous or a mixture of both. But just so you know that this particular example of course activities gives an overview of each week, and then I go into more detail. So syllabi, I've seen some syllabi that are super duper vague. And it could be a matter of circumstance, right? For example, if you didn't know you were going to teach that course until 2 weeks before the semester began, and you didn't get a template from someone who last taught the course, you don't exactly know what you're going to do. So vague is really the best bet, because you don't know exactly what to tell students. And for the record, there's been tons of times that I'm like 1 week ahead of the students with the reading. Don't feel stupid. Don't struggle with the imposter syndrome. That's just real, because teaching is not typically your only responsibility. Even if you are a clinical faculty member with a 404 course load, they want you to sit on committees. They want you to do all kinds of stuff. So you have to remember, like, begin with the end in mind. Is like, think about how you manage yourself, because we only have but so much time and so much energy. So if you have to do this, and if this is if your department lets you get away with it in the beginning, great. But, you know, this is just the overview that I like to give, and then I give more specific detail. I always give a grading criteria. I always do. And it's important to make sure that you have enough assignments inside of each category so the weights don't mess up students, okay? Students who like to check their grades throughout the semester, yeah, sometimes it might be a whole category, you have nothing in there for it, and that's bringing down their grade, and now they're worried about failing. But no, it's just because you didn't get around to grading certain assignments. Class participation, I am super explicit. For my in-person classes, when I was teaching in person as well as remote, super explicit around what it means to be get a good grade in the class participation area. So for online courses, actually this could be, I did this for some hybrid courses, discussion postings. I am really clear around what it means to post. I give examples of what a solid post looks like, because guess what? Gone are the days that you just show up and you're getting credit for class participation. I want my courses to be dynamic, and they cannot be if my students are bumps on a log. They can't. They are not simply opportunities to express your opinion. So engagement is also required as a part of the class participation guidelines. And I do think that one of the bad raps that online learning gets a really bad rap. I didn't know much about it when I first started doing it, but I think it's an amazing tool and an amazing approach for learning for certain learners. And one of the learners I'm thinking specifically about right now are for the shy students. The shy students who are not the type to be like, oh, pick me. And if there's no hand raising in your class, and just some people just talk out loud, and whenever the spirit moves them, they're going to share. It's like double Dutch. Some students are not interested in, like, is it now can I, you know what? it's not that important. And they'll sit there and you assume sometimes as the instructor that they're sitting there and they're not engaged and that they don't have any ideas or thoughts to share. No, it might just not feel like a safe space for them. And so online can be a super great way for those shy, quieter students to participate without that pressure of needing to formulate things in real time. For the slower processors, that don't mean they're stupid. That don't mean they're not smart and not getting the content that you're teaching. They just might process slower. And so sometimes these ways of participating in the class are helpful for different types of students. All right, I'll skip that. Quantity of postings. So I do typically when I was teaching online or hybrid, one posting per week, but they also had to respond to another posting. And then I would monitor that and the quality of the post would be graded. So class participation was way easier to grade online and in hybrid classes than they were in face-to-face courses. So I have this online classroom decorum, I guess, blurb. And it's important to think about the kind of environment you're trying to create. Here's the thing. We are living in some crazy, crazy times. And there are people who are going to say some crazy, crazy things. And if I care about equity and inclusion, not from a policy perspective, from an instructor perspective, I don't want anyone in my class to ever feel like they don't belong there and they don't deserve to be there because they're paying the same amount of money as somebody else. So the reality is our job to monitor that safe space. And if we allow students to say certain things and not challenge them, check them, whether it's in person or later on, that's going to add to an unsafe classroom environment. And so if a student then goes to the dean or goes to your department chair and says, you know, I'm feeling unsafe in someone's classroom, and everyone heard someone say something that was polarizing and disrespectful, and you didn't do anything about it, well, guess what? Did you have anything in your syllabus that talked about how students were supposed to show respect to one another? I know this seems basic. I know this seems elementary. And if you're teaching undergrads or grads, you might be like, why should I have to do that? Because it's not universal. Unfortunately, what some people consider to be a safe space is not the same as others. And it's our job to be clear around our expectations on what our classroom decorum should be in face-to-face and online. Because online bullying is real, right? We never used to think about how to check that online. Way easier to check it in person. Online is a little bit more subversive, and you have to be careful and think really carefully around whether or not you're allowing people to bully one another, especially if you're talking about things like your content can be easily polarizing, right? Most of us are in, assessment, evaluation, measurement, et cetera. But I was in a liberal arts division of my university. And so I had students in my class who were not measurement people. Most of my courses were not like assessment related courses. So you don't really know what courses you'll be slated to teach. And don't assume that even if it is a stats class, or a coding class or something like that, that these issues can't come up. They absolutely can. All right, assessment of class participation. I'm going to skip that because you can see that on your own. General guidelines for grades. So this is an example of what I was talking about earlier when I really dig in deeper around what the course is going to entail. For the online courses, I was super explicit what they have to read. And this is also represented inside of the learning management system, the assignments and when they're due. This syllabus would be online, so a lot of times I could hyperlink things. Even when I was teaching face-to-face though, I would do a lot of hyperlinking, like by typing out the URL in parentheses, because sometimes I would want them to go and look at stuff. So there's a term out there about how to create an interactive syllabus. And so one way to do that is to hyperlink things. Right. I had a welcome video that you could, like from my syllabus, you could kind of just click on that video and it would take you someplace to, see my video that would, me be visually introducing myself to the students. And then resources on campus. This is required. Most universities require you to put stuff about, well, maybe that'll go away. But anyway, most universities require that. So check and make sure you're having the right things on your paper around how students with disabilities can access services on campus. I have had a host of students that thought that they should be getting services or like accommodations, but they didn't go through the process on campus for documenting their disability. Therefore, I was not aware or had knowledge of like what accommodations and modifications I was supposed to make. Because for example, if you have someone with a particular documented disability and you have videos, you might have to do closed captions for those videos, right? Accessibility, I mean, not, this is sort of connected to, CMJ's mission, so it shouldn't be too far off, but how you help students access the content of your course is super important in all kinds of ways. All right, so I'm going to tell you that these other considerations is part of the reason why my syllabus ended up being like 25 plus pages, because each time I taught a course, I learned new things, and then I would learn from students like, oh, if I had that information, it wouldn't have been a confusion. It wouldn't have been so confusing. So I would just add to it because I taught the same courses plenty of times where I could just add, and sometimes it wasn't content specific. So it would go one set of feedback in one course could apply for all. So I'm going to give you one example. This course, I taught lots of different, that's the thing. I taught 7-week courses, 8-week courses, 15, 16-week, like all kinds of different weeks. But most students are thinking about the semester schedule. Most people are thinking that the course is on the semester schedule. And even if it is on the semester schedule, you have to talk about what that means in terms of workload. I've had conversations beyond your imagination, so many with colleagues within different departments around what does a 4-credit course look like in terms of workload versus a 3-credit course. Guess what? If a student asks you that question, that's a daggone good question. That's a good question. If they're looking at their course load and they're like, I got some 3-credit courses and 4-credit courses, and the 3-credit courses are requiring way more work than the 4-credit, like, what does that mean? And so because I taught courses that had different weeks in terms of what the semester looked like for them, or the quarter or trimester, I had to explain what it meant. So for example, I taught accelerated courses. So a 16-week course is condensed into 8 weeks. Guess what that means? It's going to be double harder. But they're like, oh, 8 weeks. I think they might have thought it was going to be half the amount. And if you're not clear on that first day, of course, that's going to be messing up their expectations. So some of this was to cover my butt, and some of it was to set clearer expectations with students. That's what the syllabus is supposed to do. And sometimes it was both. So when schools closed, do you have what they have at K-12 now? I got three young children. 2 of them are in school, 1 of them not yet. And now with, since COVID, it's remote schooling. Some universities are doing that now. And if I'm teaching online and you already weren't coming to campus, who cares that the university is closed? Some students who were in the online space would be like, oh, I didn't think I had to do the work because there was university curtailment or 2-hour delay. If you're not teaching in person, so it's all about thinking on how many different questions you might get. If you get the same question 4 or 5 times in a semester, that's an opportunity for you to provide more clarity the next time you teach that course, okay? How students should call you. I went to my first time in my first couple of years as a higher education instructor in my university and in my department, people were on the first name basis. So, me being fresh out of my postdoc, I'm like, sure, I guess you can call me Jade. But then I saw somebody who came in who required students to call them Dr. So-and-so. And then I went to go teach at HBCU where everybody was Dr. So-and-so. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel. Like, I'm not sure. So students are thinking that, like, should I call you Dr. Miss? And not every instructor has a doctoral degree. So you should be clear on how students should address you in writing and verbally. Syllabi are good for that. I already talked a little bit about office hours and different ways for students. I am so explicit about that because, I mean, if I had a dime for every time I've heard a colleague who taught any courses, including me, who has taught courses, said students didn't know how they could get help. You got to make that real clear. And then finally, I always have this on every syllabus. This syllabus is subject to change. Students will be promptly notified of any changes because stuff happens. And it is a contract, but you have opportunities to make addendums to that contract, but not if you don't have this note, okay? Step 3 is the learning management system. There's different LMSs. They're basically the online portal for how you're gonna house readings or videos. A lot of universities have, I don't know any universities or colleges that don't have them. There's different ones. There's Blackboard, which I think is phasing out. There's Canvas. There's some other ones that I've heard some of my colleagues using. So learning those systems are super important. And there's usually a learning curve. And then step 4 is assess, pivot, and assess. You cannot just teach as is. If people are not getting it and there's vertical alignment with like what you're teaching, you have to think about that. You can't say, oh, they didn't get it, moving on, and then the next set of content that you're teaching is related to what they should have mastered the last time around. So you can't wait until like half the semester's halfway over before you assess. We care about assessment. We should care about it inside of our courses too, right? All right, tips, tricks, and considerations. Take advantage of the Center for Teaching and Learning. My campus had one, and they came to do an observation when I was teaching in person and gave me some feedback. You know, it's another way to build up your toolkit. Will you give extra credit? That question will come, and you need to figure out how you're going to answer it before the semester starts. How will you be inclusive of all learners? How will you build in student feedback formally and informally? And how will you manage grading? Hello, I have so many tips and tricks on grading just by itself, because it is not the case that you should be giving assignments without thinking about whether or not you have the capacity to manage the grading. I'll give you one quick example. Yeah, I could do a whole another professional development series just on grading, but because grading can be so like such an overwhelming process for newer faculty and newer instructors, one tip and trick that I have when it comes to final papers, and this is for the students, it helps the students and it helps me. I break down the sections of the paper. If it's like a expository writing, like, you know, something real like straight, if it's prose or poetry, you can't really do this. But if it's like a nonfiction style of writing, I break it down into sections. So when I taught research methods, for example, the final product was a research proposal, and students had to basically like follow the sections: intro, lit review, methods. Those were it. And so I spent a lot of time on each of those, but by the time I finished teaching intro, then they had to draft their intro. Then by the time they got to live, they had to draft. So by the time they got to their and that was throughout the 8 weeks of the course. So by the time we got to week 7, they got feedback on each section from me. So by the time the course was over and they had to give me their final drafts of each sections all put together, I had already seen all their work. It made grading so much easier, and the quality of the work was better, and students didn't feel mad overwhelmed at the end because they had already had a chance to take a stab at a draft prior to, and that was in 8 weeks. If I could do that in 8 weeks, y'all can definitely do that if you teach a 16-week or 15-week course. Not waiting to the end for grading is a game changer for faculty and workload and burnout, seriously. And then how will you evaluate yourself? I have this letter that I have students do at the end of each course, and they have to write a letter to the next set of students. So like if I'm going to teach the course again to the next semester or the next trimester, I have students write, like, if you had a chance to tell a future student who's going to take this course things that you would have done differently, things you learn and you appreciate, what would you write? And they have to write that as an evaluation at the end. And what that does is help me know like what they gained from it and what they didn't. I do a lot of different evaluations at the end, but that particular type of evaluation is super helpful because I do end up putting it in my syllabi. I have had 1 or 2 pages of like things from previous students, and I wouldn't have waited till the end for that paper. Hello, think about how much more meaningful it is for them to hear that from other graduate students that took the course versus just hear it from me. Oh, I really would have taken advantage of the Writing Center's tutor because I really struggled. So it was a really good strategy for evaluation because it was informal, but it was also ways in which I could have the students reflect and me get feedback on my teaching. And then that's it. I zoomed through. No pun intended on the Zoom. But yeah, I am sorry that I didn't have more time for Q&A, but we got 3 minutes. So let's make it happen. You can use the chat or you can take yourself off mute. Mic drop. So good that nobody has questions. Even if you have a comment, I'd love to hear a comment if you want to. You're welcome, Ramona. Oh, I'm glad.